Welcome to Alberta Conservation Association's Harvest Your Own podcast, the resource for everything hunting, navigating through the field, the butcher shop, and the kitchen. Life is all about great food. Let's get started.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Brad Fenson, an avid outdoor enthusiast who has worked as a freelance journalist, photographer, and public speaker for over 3 decades. I have hunted, fished, and foraged all my life and hope to share my passion for the outdoors. Along the way, I want to encourage everyone to harvest wild proteins and enjoy the satisfaction of providing the next meal for your family. Our goal is to educate, entertain, and inspire individuals to get outdoors and create a connection between food, health, and your future meals. Welcome to Harvest Your Own. Today I have a special guest, John Barklow. Currently works with Sitka as a manager and product developer. Been in that field for close to a decade, but he's got an interesting background. Trains people in search and rescue and special operations, how to survive in tough conditions or challenging conditions. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's always nice to be able to kind of talk to a newer audience, kind of spread the word.
Yeah, Harvest Your Own is really geared towards those first-time hunters or people aspiring to do more outdoors, and I couldn't think of a better person to come on and talk about dressing for success than John yourself. Like, give us a little bit of your background and history in terms of what you bring to the table today for knowledge on dressing and being comfortable and facing challenging conditions.
I have hunted most of my life. I can't quite add it up in my head right now. Let's call it 35 years. Self-taught archery hunter from back east in the U.S. and, flailed around for quite a long time. Not much success, but seeking adventure, I entered the military, the Navy specifically, and I went around the world diving as a Navy diver. And the mountains continued to draw me in, kind of as I moved around the U.S. and started to expand my hunting opportunities. And then I ended up in Alaska, actually, teaching special operations troops, specifically Navy SEALs. And that's really where kind of my outdoor acumen really took off, is when I turned from the student to the instructor. And, after 9/11, as you could imagine, trying to get guys trained up to go to Afghanistan and do all these kind of crazy things we never thought we would do at higher elevations in the mountains. We were allowed to go and reach out to some of the biggest and best brands in the outdoor industry to help us, create a clothing system, build backpacks, sleeping bags, tents, you name it. And so that's really what started me down the path of not just trying to kind of master some of these things, but have a really deep understanding and really be able to talk, to the people specifically. And then jump ahead, I've been at Sitka a while, and, I guess things come full circle, and I'm kind of one of those people now. So, I've helped build out the clothing line at Sitka, specifically the big game line. And I just have tapped into, all those lessons and all that experience that I've had over the last, because I did that. I taught special operations for almost 20 years. So, and I've just tried to bring those lessons to the hunting world, because I think there's a lot of crossover and synergy there.
Absolutely. I mean, being comfortable in the outdoors leads to success. If you're struggling to stay comfortable and stay alive, it's not much fun. But, I often, in my writing and stuff, I often say that my grandpa, looking forward, wouldn't believe the equipment we have available today. Back in his era, there would have been wool, there would have been the plaid wool jackets and pants and wool long underwear and wool socks and rubberized rain suits. And they still went out and did lots. But today we are absolutely blessed with the multitude and diversity of clothing and options and stuff to beat any type of weather, whether it's too hot, raining, snowing, cold. We should always be comfortable in the field. And that comes, I love your slogan on one of your web pages here, knowledge weighs nothing. You know, we educate ourselves to know things. We're always comfortable, and we're going to be more successful no matter what we take on as a new endeavor.
Yeah, and I think we want to be successful. We also want to enjoy ourselves, however we define that. And we want to be safe so that we come back home. And I often get the question, well, my grandpa did this or my dad did that, and he wore wool or he wore denim, and they did, and absolutely, and I give them a lot of credit, but I don't think what people understand is that they suffered more than we have to suffer today. They carried more, it weighed more. They were pushed out of the mountains and the fields earlier than we would, today. And that's all due to modern, technology, the clothing, the equipment we have, and there's so much of it that we can go out there, and I like to say we can go out there and leave on our own terms, not Mother Nature's. And so that's the difference.
Yeah, that's an important fact. We talk about old school technologies and new. One of the biggest learning curves, I'll call it, that people face nowadays is learning the jargon. Like, can you imagine coming into the outdoor community with no background, no basis, and you're faced with all the different clothing that's on the market and all these high-tech names? Like, how do you unravel some of that jargon?
I think we've made it more complicated than it has to be. And, for the consumer, for the hunter looking to buy new stuff, there's more options and choices than ever. And I think that's great because not any one thing is perfect for everyone. And so when I'm talking to folks about clothing, I like to say that I call it the 8-piece clothing system. And I don't think no matter what you're doing from, going on a big game hunt or sitting in a tree stand or, shooting ducks out of a blind or backcountry skiing or going on a backpack hunt, I think 8 pieces of clothing at the most, but 8 pieces of clothing are what most people need. And so that's kind of a shocker to folks. When I was in the military, we actually developed a clothing system with some folks in the outdoor industry, and it was an 8-layer clothing system. And I think within that system of 8 layers, it was 24 pieces.
Wow.
And now it's gotten to the point where I say, I think you only need 8. So, there's always a little bit here and there, and there's lots of choice, right? There's lots of choice within those eight pieces. And we can, choose to get into some of that or not. But basically, when you think about it, you want to have a base layer top and bottom. So that's kind of the part that goes directly next to your skin, right? Lightweight, moves moisture, dries quickly, helps your body thermoregulate, keeps you comfortable. And at that level, you basically have the choice of a synthetic or a wool. And really, it's what I call shooter's choice. You're not going to make a bad choice, right? It's just kind of personal preference. So you have a base layer top, you have a base layer bottom. That goes next to your skin. That's the foundation of your system. Then let's get a pair of pants on. So a pair of soft shell pants. So this is your modern day hunting pants. Tons of options here. Do you want knee pads or not? Do you want suspenders, nylon, polyester, hip vents? Like there's tons and tons and tons of options. But what this is going to do is give you some pockets to carry some stuff around. And it is going to be kind of your armor. So it's going to help, keep abrasion off you. So when you're crawling and climbing and going over blowdown and all this stuff, that's going to be your protection. The next layer, so piece number 4 is what I call active insulation. And so what active insulation is something that you put on when it's cool enough that you need some clothing to help manage your body heat, keep your body heat while you're moving because it's so cold. So I can't move quick enough to stay warm. I need a little bit more insulation, and I need this insulation to breathe incredibly well. I need it to, be very lightweight. I need it to dry quick. And so its most basic and active insulation is what most people would consider or call heavyweight fleece. There's some other, what I call active hybrid insulation. So the Kelvin Ambient would be, or the Sika Ambient would be an example of that. But that's a critical layer because you can put it on, you can move, and you're not going to overheat and sweat, right? Number 5 is something that a lot of people, I think, dismiss or don't know about, and I call it, the wind layer. So the wind layer could be anything from a very simple wind shirt that, weighs less than 2 ounces to maybe a fully featured windstopper jacket, say the Sika Jetstream, right? And so what that's going to do is it's going to block the wind. And I tell folks, I said, if you understand how your body loses heat, then you will understand how to counter those forces and retain heat to stay warm and comfortable. And so when wind is blowing against you, and I know where you live, you get a lot of wind. We do down here in Montana as well. That oftentimes just blocking the wind, with wearing a base layer, maybe wearing a piece of active insulation, and just blocking the wind is what you need to retain the body heat to stay comfortable and focused. So I think a wind layer is critical. It's also often less expensive, less noisy, and more durable than rain gear. Because I know a lot of folks go, well, I'm counting ounces. I'm going to leave the wind stopper or wind layer to bring your rain jacket. Certainly can. It's not going to breathe as well, and you're going to beat up the rain jacket. And when you really need it, it may fail on you. So that's piece 5. Piece 6 is a static or puffy jacket. So this is your lofted insulation, and this is different than active insulation. So this is the puffy jacket that you should always have, no matter what time of year. You can have a really big, super warm one, or you can have a thinner, not so warm one, but you should have that. And the reason is because this helps govern our body heat. We want to be very stingy with our body heat when we're outdoors. So when we, are hiking and we get to the top of the ridge, we're going to stop and do a map study. We're going to, have a rest break and eat some food, or sit behind the glass, or call for elk, or whatever the case may be. Our bodies are not generating heat. And so we want to capture that heat escaping away so that we can dry our clothes, we can stay warm. We don't want to give up that heat that we work so hard to generate. And so that's what that static puffy jacket does. Love it with a hood and just, kind of throw it over top of everything. And then the last 2 pieces are the rain jacket and the rain pants. And what I say about rain gear is it's like car insurance. Nobody wants to buy it. Nobody wants to wear it, right? We don't want to use it. But when we need it, we're really lucky and happy that we bought the best we could afford, because nothing will stop or keep the rain out like rain gear. None of the other pieces I talked about, when it's pouring out and you need to stay dry so that you can stay warm and you can stay focused and not become hypothermic, the only thing that's going to work is rain gear. And so with a few, minor tweaks, those are the 8 pieces that the vast majority of us need to get through our year in North America.
Yeah, that's a really good explanation of the different layers, how they work, why you need them, and when to use them. I think that's really important. And, we do have lots of information on Harvest Your Own about dressing for success and being in the outdoors and doing stuff, so people can always go there for a reference.
This podcast is produced for Harvest Your Own, a program dedicated to those who want to reconnect with food and health through their experiences outdoors. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a resource for individuals to learn more about hunting and the outdoors. There's information to get you started and ensure that your compass stays pointed in the right direction to be successful. Where's your next meal coming from?
John, the one thing that I haven't heard is what do we need to do for our hands, feet, and head?
Right. So extremities are that's outside of the eight pieces of clothing. Extremities are tough. They're just tough to stay warm because they're at the end of our arms and legs. And everybody's going to be a little different, and it's really going to depend on what you're doing and what season. But what I like to do is I like to build my hand and footwear systems similarly to the way I just built a clothing system. So, for hands, it's liner gloves, so a thin liner glove, synthetic or wool, doesn't matter. And then I want some type of windstopper glove. It's maybe also thin, so maybe I don't wear them together, but one's kind of I can knock around in, and the other is for those windy conditions or some light precipitation. And then I really like some kind of waterproof shell glove with a removable liner, so that's kind of more the static puffy for your hand and your rain gear. So I can put the shell on, protect my hand from the rain or the snow. I can put the liner inside to provide the warmth. And if I really get cold, I can put the liner glove on my hand and then stick it in that insulated glove and shell. If I'm going out in the middle of winter, oftentimes I'll bring a pair of mitten liners just because I guess my years of instructing, I've seen people get frostbite, frost nip, and, cold injuries. And so, I've seen gloves blow down mountains and people left, kind of stranded without hand protection. And so if somebody's hands are injured, mittens often are a good course to put on top. And then with socks, it's really personal preference. Some people run liner socks, some people don't. A liner sock is basically a base layer for your foot, and it's going to pull the moisture directly away from your skin. So I tell folks if, their feet sweat profusely, maybe a liner sock is a good option, or if people are prone to blisters. Either way, from there, you go to, a nice wool sock, a lot of different weights to choose from. But I think it's important that whatever sock system folks choose, that they absolutely choose their boots to get the sizing properly after they've figured out their sock system. And then something, people don't talk about is, when boots get wet in the field, especially if they're an insulated boot or a waterproof boot, they're often not going to dry it, especially in the cold. And so what I call it's called a vapor barrier sock. So that's kind of like almost a wind stopper layer, so to speak, but it protects your warm, dry foot and socks from the cold, wet boot. And then you can often, bring a puffy sock in the cold, and that's kind of like your static insulation, right? So I put the little puffy sock on or the camp bootie on in the cold weather when I'm hanging around camp or sleeping, just to help my feet stay warm. And then to kind of top the whole thing off, pun intended, is a beanie, often a wool beanie or toque. It's critical because we can have all this clothing on and we can be bundled up, but if we don't put something on our head, and often that beanie is the proper tool. It certainly could be a hood, but a lot of that heat is going to find the path of least resistance and go right out the top of our head. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I approach the hands, feet, and head.
Yeah, it's amazing how much heat you can lose through your extremities, especially your head. And if you don't take care of those little details, you can have 8 layers on your body, and you will still end up cold because your extremities will make you cold.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that works, but it's true.
Yeah, I think that the feet, hands, head plays, I don't know if it's the most critical role, but I know I have some friends that I hunt with that love waterfowl, and one of the ladies always gets cold, and she's got like heavy jackets and all the rest of it. But from what I recall, her first complaint is always, my feet are getting cold. And once her feet get cold, she gets cold.
Right. Yeah, that's going to drive more of us out of the field than anything is cold hands or cold feet. So it's really critical that, we try to solve for those issues as best we can. And so, if you're in a duck blind as an example, depending on what that blind is constructed of and what it's sitting on, but often you can, use a piece of foam ground pad, even thick carpeting with some padding on it to insulate yourself from that cold ground. So similarly to a ground pad you would use under a sleeping bag, you could do the same thing under your seat and under your feet. I tell folks that are whitetail hunting, that think about insulating your tree stand depending on, the season, because it helps. Because, a lot of times when we're hunting, we're very static. We're not generating heat. So once that blood flow kind of slows down, especially to the extremities, then, unfortunately, that's when the hands and the feet start getting cold.
Yeah, we're actually built to be good transmitters of cold. I'll relate back to spring snow goose season. We normally get out there when the birds first show up. The ground is still frozen solid, and you're sitting on one great big frozen ice cube. And boy, even when you dress in layers and have all the warm stuff, it doesn't take long before that cold starts creeping in. I've formed a habit of taking an extra set of bibs with me and throwing them in the bottom of my blind to lay on. And, it's that barrier between the cold, and it does make a big difference in terms of staying warm.
Yeah, no, there you go. And again, if you understand how the body loses heat, then you can understand how to counter those forces. So, that conductive heat loss, when your warm body is laying on that cold ground, your body's going to give up heat to the ground. And so anything you can do to insulate yourself is going to help slow that process. Yeah, at a certain point, we're all going to get cold and decide we've had enough fun and leave. But hopefully, you've had a great experience or shot your limit, before that happens. And so, yeah, I just tell folks to, think through the process and don't just, it's kind of a thinking person's game, in that you don't just want to take my advice or, anyone else's without going out and trying it for yourself, and then figuring out specifically what works for you.
Right. And, thinking it through does make a big difference, whether you're going out on a cold morning and running around setting up decoys for an hour and then jumping into a cold blind on the cold ground, or walking into a tree stand when it's minus 25 and you have a mile to cover, and you basically work up a sweat before you get to your tree and you're going to sit for the next 4 hours. Having those base layers to draw the moisture off you, having those mid layers to hold your heat in, having zippers to open up that clothing to let some of that heat out while you're moving, and then be able to do it up to trap the heat when you stop. Those are all important features and concepts and ways of thinking in order to stay warm in the field.
Yeah, it's such a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up. So when we're building out a clothing system, and let's include hands and feet and head at this point, when we're building that out to go into whatever environment, to do whatever pursuit, I often say that it's really about managing our moisture, right? And so what I mean by that is, if we have a clothing system that, can manage moisture, so, we've talked base layers and how that moisture moves off our skin. So if our skin is dry, oftentimes we feel comfortable. But really what these clothing systems are trying to do is manage moisture. And so it's kind of, at first you're like, huh, what? But, we're trying to manage moisture from the inside out. So that is from sweat, to your point. And then we're trying to manage moisture from the outside in the form of rain and snow. And the reason moisture management is so critical to our kind of success and comfort is, when we're dry, our bodies have the best ability to thermoregulate themselves, so stay cool or stay warm. And if you do set up those decoys for an hour, so you're active, your body's generating heat, you're probably producing some sweat, and then you jump into that blind, or you walk to that tree stand and generate heat and then sit down, either way, you're going to go from active to static, and your clothing system needs to quickly and efficiently manage that moisture, pull it off your skin, and begin to move it through those clothing layers so that you can, give yourself the best chance of staying warm. And if you don't do that, or even if you do that and don't think about it because you're wearing too many clothes and you've kind of overwhelmed the system, when you sit down, it's going to take longer to dry out than it is for your body to lose the heat. And then you're going to sit there and become chilled right away. And you're going to start to shiver. And you're going to go, geez, I've only been here 15 minutes sitting in spline. And, I'm already feeling cold. And the worst part is we kind of do it to ourselves. And so that's where this active insulation comes in. When you're setting up peaks, when you're walking to the stand, when you're climbing to the top of the ridge, you want to dress what I call comfortably cool. So if you're standing there at the truck and you're waiting on your buddy and you are dressed appropriately for movement, you should be kind of anxious and just a little bit chilled, because you know that as soon as you start moving and put your body under a load, that you're going to generate warmth. And if you're standing there and you could wait 30 minutes for your buddy to get done screwing around in the dark, you're dressed too warm, right? And so you want to make sure that we're trying to, again, moisture management, we're trying to generate as little sweat as possible, because not only is sweat going to make the clothing layers damp, potentially overwhelm them, but we're also going to make ourselves dehydrated. And a morning hunt or an afternoon hunt, that's not as critical. But if you're out on a backcountry hunt for a week or 10 days, that literally becomes critical. And again, it's kind of like we're kicking our own butts and doing it to ourselves, because we're just not thinking through, like, okay, what is going on right now? What do I need to do to address these scenarios or this environment? And then if something begins to go, like I'm getting cold, something begins to go the wrong way, how do I counter that to then bring it back to some point of neutrality?
Yeah, it's interesting how much moisture management plays a role in all this. We call them base layers. Some people refer to them as the wicking layers. As you mentioned, it pulls that moisture off your skin. Yep. But if you manage the moisture, you can beat the heat, you can beat the cold, and then moisture again from the outside with rain gear and other things, you can beat the elements, is what I'll call them. But moisture management is much bigger than that. It's also your own personal hydration and the way you feel and how you self-regulate. So moisture management is the most critical, and I think you couldn't overstress the importance of a base layer or a wicking layer.
To me, it is. I agree. It is the foundation of a system, and I think that. So I'll give you a story. I was in Ohio. That's where I grew up, actually, but I was in Ohio several years ago, whitetail hunting in southern Ohio, one of the best counties in the state for mature whitetail deer, and I was really excited. And I was in a camp, and there were a few other folks that I didn't know, and we were discussing, that obviously the conversation always turns to gear. And so people were talking about gear, and the guy asked me about clothing, and I'm talking to him about, the Sitka Stratus system and how, it has all these great attributes, and how I think it would help him have a more enjoyable experience. And then, of course, if you stay out there longer, then your chances of success go up. And so they actually had a little store there. And so he actually bought a Stratus jacket and a bib. And I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, great, see what see how his morning hunt goes. Well, I got back about 11 o'clock that morning, and he was already back. So I'm thinking, well, maybe he tagged out, and he hadn't. And I said, well, how'd your hunt go? And he said, miserable. Your clothing system was horrible. It didn't work. I got very chilled, and I was back at camp by 8 o'clock. And I was like, wow, let's dig into this a little bit and kind of, figure out what went wrong. And so what went wrong was this gentleman was new to these modern technical clothing systems. And so, he had bought this outerwear piece, this light, soft, quiet, wind stopper, insulated layer, and put it directly over top of a cotton t-shirt, cotton long johns, didn't bring a beanie, and then I think he smoked a cigarette before he walked there, so he had vasoconstriction. I mean, literally did everything wrong. And then when he got there, he was sweated up because he had, not thought that maybe I shouldn't wear the jacket as I'm walking to my stand. And so that cotton layer got wet, damp, and there was nothing, no clothing system in the world was going to stop him from not getting cold at that point. And so that base layer, you said it at least once, it's so critical to not only keeping us warm in cold temperatures, but also cool in hot temperatures. And so I just say it's the foundation of a clothing system. No matter what you put on top, a well thought out synthetic or wool base layer next to skin layer, wicking layer, is going to make everything else you put on top perform better.
And it's interesting, we talk about the right things to do, but you really touched on an important point, and that's what not to do or what to avoid. And cotton. So many people wear cotton T-shirts and cotton long underwear, cotton socks, even denim. That stuff will make you cold and keep you cold.
Yeah, it's so easy to overlook that layer because intuitively we wear cotton a lot, especially at T-shirts and underwear and things like that. But when you're going to invest this time and money in building these technical systems to go outside to do whatever hunting discipline you choose, that technical layering system has to go all the way to the skin. And if not, then you really are kind of wasting some of that money and effort, and you're not going to get a full appreciation and true joy out of what that system can provide you.
This podcast was made possible by Alberta Conservation Association and the Harvest Your Own community. If you're interested in harvesting your own food, there's a comprehensive collection of information to gain insight and knowledge. Head to the field, harvest your own protein, prepare it, and taste the results. HarvestYourOwn.ca is a library of information from getting started and geared up to processing, butchering, and cooking wild game to make the connection between health and food.
Yes, Sitka does a great job. There's lots of different clothing out there and people have lots of options, but if you want to understand pieces of a system, how they work, it's a good website to go to just read about the different clothing, the different types of material that are used and why they're used, because it is an education.
Yeah, it's definitely an education, and I appreciate the shout out. I think what's important for people to understand is, a lot of times these brands, to include Sitka, we like to talk about a specific piece. We like to talk about, the new product that's coming out and why that new product's so good and the technology within that product. But what I think as a community, a hunting community, we need to do a better job of is talk about those things in slightly more generic terms, kind of like we are today. And so, if one person says, well, I'm Sitka head to toe, and another says, their brand X, you can still take the 8 pieces if you understand each piece and what it does and kind of the generalities of it, and still build a system. And so I think that's important. That's an important conversation. And then the other thing is that people need to, and this is how I build when I'm working with the team, and we found a new technology, or we found a new textile, or we have an idea for a new jacket or pants. The first thing I do, and I guess it's just from all those years in the military building those systems and training guys, is I think about how it will dovetail into the existing system. So, as an example, we're going to put a new puffy jacket in. It's like, okay, does that puffy jacket fit into this system? Does this new technology make this system better? Or is this so far advanced that we now need to change all other 7 pieces to come up to speed to this puffy jacket? And so I like to look at nothing in isolation. I mean, you do at a certain point when you're building it specifically, but I like to look at those 8 pieces as an holistic system. And so the example of your cotton base layer is perfect. So if my holistic system has all these great pieces and technology and textile advancement, and you build that foundation and lay it on top of cotton base layers, cotton underwear, you've essentially built a house on a foundation of quicksand.
You better be tough.
Yeah, and it's just not going to do what you have been led to believe it can do.
Yeah, it's important to understand the layers and what they do, what it consists of in order to work. I had a very good experience this February. I went on a late season mountain goat hunt and faced a series of different extremes in terms of weather and challenge. I hiked from 8 in the morning till 3 the next morning. And of course, moving at that speed on snowshoes, I had a good Sitka base layer, the shell pants, everything was breathable, but I was moving and, it was comfortable. But at the end of the day, when we got back to the quad and we still had an hour and a half ride back to the truck at 2 in the morning, I had your new Blizzard Aerolite, that aerogel, and I was amazed at how it worked because I was already chilled just standing around getting changed. But, I had my puffy jacket in my pack that I took all the way up the mountain, and when I shot my goat, I had that to put on, stayed warm, took it off, hiked out, got back to the quad where I had a second pack with that Blizzard Aerolite put on. So all kinds of different activity, different weather, different challenges, but I stayed warm throughout it all.
Yeah, you were constantly changing and adapting to the environment. And then, over that course of time, your body starts to get run down. You can't fuel it quite enough. Those late season mountain goat hunts, to me, are the toughest, most difficult, graduate level hunting that we have in North America. Because there's so many things. So let's put the hunting aside and just say, hey, we're going to go out and do this thing in this cold weather in these remote locations with snow on the ground, and we're going to spend X number of days out there. That alone is enough. And then you fold in the hunting component of that, and it really puts it at almost like a PhD level of hunting. And you really have to have your stuff dialed because, let's be honest, there's a lot of things out there that can kill you, and most of them are the weather. And so by countering that, I like to say that our clothing is our first line of protection. So there's a show called Naked and Afraid. I don't know if you guys know that up in Canada.
Yeah, we have it up here.
And I like to joke, and I say, yeah, the reason they're afraid is because they're naked, right? And clothing is our first line of defense from the elements. I consider clothing one of my pieces of survival gear because I know that at a minimum it's going to, help protect me from the elements. And so, it's so vital. And, to have a piece like a Blizzard, up in northern British Columbia several years ago, one of the wranglers, we were on a horse hunt and he got completely soaked. He was wearing decent gear, but he got completely soaked. He didn't have rain gear. He hadn't brought a puffy jacket. And this guy was going hypothermic. And so, changed him out didn't have time to, have him cook his system dry from body heat, to change him out into some dry base layers, etc. And he was still kind of going downhill. And I gave him my big puffy jacket. And I swear within a minute, it was almost like you could see the life coming back to his eyes. And what that puffy jacket did is just stop the escape of body heat, because he was losing more body heat than he could generate, which is essentially hypothermia. And it's at a minimum, I don't know if it saved his life, but at a minimum, it saved all of us from having to go through a big ordeal. And, several hours later, we could go back to hunting. So, it's absolutely vital.
And I use these extremes because people that are listening are like, well, I'm not going to hunt late season mountain goat. No, but this is a lesson for you when you go out on a duck hunt and it's below freezing in the morning and then going to warm up to above freezing by 10 in the morning, and how to prepare yourself by thinking about how you lose heat or how you manage your heat and what layers you might need to pack them in advance. Or if you're a first-time deer hunter and you're going out and it's supposed to be nice and then turn to freezing rain in the afternoon, you don't have to go home. You just have to plan for it so you can stay in the field, be comfortable, and face the challenges head on.
Yeah, correctly. You want to plan for those contingencies so that, an inconvenient weather cycle doesn't become a tragedy.
Right.
So the deer hunter where it's, dry in the morning and then freezing rain in the afternoon, that happens a lot. And so, at a minimum, it'll ruin your hunt. And we certainly don't want that to happen. We want to maximize our time. But at the worst, that could turn into a potential life-threatening scenario. If, you can't make it back to your truck, you get lost, etc. It'll snow, at least down here, it'll snow any month of the year in the mountains at some type of elevation. And so in Colorado last week, it hasn't even been a week, at 11,000 feet, it's already snowed, like appreciable snowfall to where it stuck around, several inches. Our elk season here is going to start this weekend. I've seen it snow, which is crazy because it's 90 some degrees outside at the moment, but in the next 4 weeks, it will snow one of those weeks, probably, at 8,000 feet, maybe even a little lower. And so if you're not prepared for that, you're not thinking you're going to go on that extreme late season mountain goat hunt. But if you haven't prepared and maybe brought all those 8 pieces, then you are not adaptable to these dynamic weather conditions. And, people say, well, I don't need rain gear. It's not going to rain in the forecast. Well, my experience is forecasts aren't always accurate, right? Or I don't need that puffy jacket. Well, what if, right? And so what if weighs a lot, but, I think those 8 pieces are just cheap insurance that you can meet the demands that Mother Nature is going to dish out. And if not, then hey, you carried around an extra 14 ounces. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah, exactly. And planning ahead makes a huge difference in understanding it, of course. John, you do bring a wealth of knowledge to the table. I appreciate everything that you've shared with us today. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Knowledge from Storms?
Yeah. So Knowledge from Storms is my website, knowledgefromstorms.com. I've also got a YouTube channel by the same name, Knowledge from Storms. And then on Instagram, I'm just at J Barklow. And my Instagram is not, myself and cat pictures. I try to post one video a week that's educational about something, some piece of clothing or equipment or theory or mindset or test method or something like that, just to educate. That's what these platforms for me are all about, is just to educate hunters and people that just want to go enjoy the outdoors and do it at a level that they can, I like to say, live, thrive, and survive. That's what those platforms are all about.
It's a great motto, but it's actually a better philosophy to live by.
Yeah, that can be applied to a lot of things. But no, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I hope it's not the last.
Absolutely. We'll take it somewhere in the future. I'd like to thank you for your time. We're going to put John's contact for Knowledge of the Storms and Sitka and his social media handles up when we put the podcast up. So thanks for listening. We hope to inspire people to reconnect with nature and appreciate where your food comes from by harvesting your own. For more information on getting started or to learn specifics about the Field to Fork experience, visit harvestyourown.ca and follow on Facebook and Instagram. Check back often for new material, recipes, and videos that are posted regularly. Please subscribe to Harvest Your Own podcast and take the time to rate and review the show to help us build a dedicated core of passionate hunters as our regular audience. Until next time, embrace the outdoors and all it has to offer. Thanks for joining us.